Good evening, I'm Mayor Sanders, and today what we are going to do is, instead of going out into the streets, we're going to basically be doing a review of the 8 million different things that are happening in city government. Generally speaking, I like to use this program to go out, interview people who are working on special projects, and do a wide variety of things, but there is so much going on now that I think it would be effective and worthwhile if we just concentrated on those things right now. My guest today, to keep the discussion alive and stimulating, is George Thabault, and George is my assistant and has been, how long, George?
14 months.
And counting every day. George is a former alderman from Ward 5 in Burlington. Grew up in Winooski. And how long have you been living in the big city, George?
Probably about 15 years.
15 years. You have transition completed out here, think you're feeling comfortable? Okay, and George is familiar as I am with all of these programs because he gets involved in virtually every one of them. Let me just start off by reviewing some of the major projects that are taking place in the city right now. Probably one area where we as a city have been putting as much energy as anything else since I've been mayor is in the whole question of dealing with the city's infrastructure. The truth is that before I was mayor, the infrastructure in the city was not in terribly good shape, and there really were not the plans on board that there should have been to deal with those very expensive and enormous problems. Let me just touch on three areas that I think we're making significant progress on. Number one is streets and sidewalks. I would say now that we're over 50% completed with the repaving project. And as people will recall, our goal was to undertake a project which we thought would be about 7 years, in which we would essentially repave and rework every street and every sidewalk in the city which needed work. And people will recall that not so many years ago, the streets really were in a disastrous shape. I would say what do you think, George? We're 50%? We're more than 50%.
Close to it, yeah.
Thank you, George.
We have the big project on North Avenue that's going to be done next year in conjunction with the sewage improvements. So that'll be a big piece of road work too.
Right. Some of the work that has not yet been done can't be done until we do the sewers, because obviously we're not going to pave the street. And so the one on where
North Avenue and some streets, some side streets along North Avenue will be a major piece of work, an $8 million project with sewers and then a complete repaving of the North Avenue area with new sidewalks from basically from around Burlington High School out to the end of North Avenue.
Okay. I would say, though, I think virtually every major artery in the city now has been pretty much dealt with. The Pine Street was dealt with.
Pine Street, Main Street, Pearl Street, Shelburne Road,
Winooski Avenue this year.
And some sections of North Avenue too. So.
Right. So I think we have gotten most of the major arteries. We have gotten a lot of the side streets. We have done tremendous amounts of sidewalk repaving, all of it done to make it handicapped accessible. So I think we are making some real progress in that area. The second area of major infrastructural concern, if you like, is the solid waste problem, which deals with the landfill. I think everybody knows that up until a few years ago, at least, our landfill was not being run as well as it might have been. And I think we can say that since Public Works was formed, we now have that situation pretty well under control. The landfill now, I think, and from what people tell me, state people tell me, is being run as well as any landfill in the state. And more importantly, we are in the process of phasing it out. And the estimate is what, between 12 months and?
About the middle of 1989 would be the end close date.
Okay, so there's some option there, and as I think many people know, the city is now looking at a couple of options as to where the new landfill will be. It will not be in the city of Burlington. It looks like we'll be working in a partnership with the towns in Lamoille County for a landfill in Hyde Park, I believe. Was it Morrisville or?
Hyde Park.
Hyde Park, right. Or else doing something with communities here in Chittenden County. But we will be out of the landfill in a year and a half. And in fact, just this week, we announced to me what is just a very, very exciting project uh, through which the landfill will be converted into a very, very beautiful public park. And what we have there is 25 acres of land that for the last 30 years or so has been a landfill. And the thoughts are now to be making it into a major inner city park, which to me is really exciting, because you're going from something which has been an eyesore to something which will be really a major improvement, I think, to the community. And at this point, what I do want to mention to the viewers, people in Burlington especially, is that there are going to be a number of public hearings conducted, I think, by the Parks and Recreation Department, as well as the Old North End Aldermanic Committee, who will be getting input from people and getting people's thoughts as to how they would like, what they would like this public park to contain. But let me mention just some of the ideas so far that have come out through public hearings. We're talking about the possibility of softball fields there. We're talking about the possibility of tennis courts, of basketball courts, and both the tennis and basketball courts could be lit at night. Horseshoe complex with about a dozen different pits, hiking and cross-country trails, as well as jogging and fitness stations. And then, to me, what is perhaps the most exciting aspect of this whole thing, we're talking about a hill which could be used for downhill skiing with a rope tow. And I know that Brattleboro has a downhill skiing area in their public park. I think St. Albans does well. Have you ever been there too?
Yes. Yep. Years ago, I worked in the ski business, and there were a lot of communities had small little hills for beginners and kids from age 3 to about 15, and a lot of fun.
That seems to me to be fantastic. We're now beginning to use, and we want to mention this again to the public, that the bicycle path will be used and can be used in the wintertime for cross-country skiing. But the idea of doing downhill skiing, I don't think we're about to compete with Stowe yet, but the idea of having that as a recreational area where kids can learn how to ski, people just want to have a good time in the day or night, seems to me to be something that would be really very, very exciting. But in any case, I mean, the good news is that after 30 years of the Old North End having to live with that area as a landfill, the transition is coming pretty soon. We should be out of there in a year, 2 years. And then the hope is that not only will we close the place out in an environmentally sound way, but we're going to convert it into a real public attribute, which will be a public park. And once again, watch the papers. There'll be a lot of public discussion. We want to hear what your views are as to how this 25-acre piece of property can be converted into a park. But it has enormous possibilities.
Bernie, one thing that people don't realize about the park too is that right beyond the park in the Intervale, the state with city and the Ducks Unlimited group are undertaking a expansion of wetlands area to create more habitat for ducks and all kinds of waterfowl and birds. So it should be a really beautiful place to from which to venture out into the Intervale and look for birds and see a lot of wildlife as well.
And right. The beauty of this is that if the city itself wanted to purchase 25 acres of downtown land to make it into a public park, it would be obviously very, very expensive. We own that property now. And in fact, a significant amount of money has already been appropriated to phase it out. So the truth is that I think at this point, it looks like we're going to need to convert that landfill into a 25-acre public park is $400,000 or $500,000, which for a 25-acre park is not a lot of money. So that's an area that we'll be working on and that we'll be looking for public input about. So those are two areas that we're dealing with now that are infrastructural concerns. Number one is streets and sidewalks, in where we're making real progress, and I would say in 3 or 4 years we will be finished and then have a sensible maintenance program. Number two is the landfill situation, where I think we'll be out of the Burlington landfill in a year or 2 years and convert that into a public park. So those are two areas that I think the city has made substantial progress. Third area, and an area that has received more attention than any of the other major infrastructural concerns this year, has of course been with our sewer system and the pollution of Lake Champlain. As we have discussed on previous programs and had a lengthy talk with Steve Goodkind of the Public Works Department about what the problem that we have is a combined sewer overflow problem which has existed in this city literally for decades, forever. And what essentially happens is the 2% of the days when we have torrential rainfall, our wastewater plants are unable to handle the millions of gallons of water that go streaming down to the wastewater plants into the lake. And what happens as a result is that the storm water combines with the sanitary waste and millions of gallons of waste go dumping into the lake. And as people will recall, as a result of that, the beaches were closed down on several occasions this year. As I think people also know, that in the fall, the city entered into prolonged discussions and negotiations with state government, and out of that came an agreement which will call for shared federal, state, and local funding for a major sewer improvement program to deal with this problem that has gone on for decades. This program is going to be taken into the legislature, and we are going to do everything that we can to work with people throughout the state of Vermont to make sure it's passed. Some people, I think, have maybe been reading in the papers that some members of the legislature saying, well, it's too much money for Burlington. Well, it's not Burlington that's going to be the recipient or the beneficiary of this program. The goal is, of course, is to make sure that this Lake Champlain, which is the most important natural resource that we have in the state of Vermont, remains healthy and remains vital and alive. And you've got to be out of your mind, in my view, not to understand the importance of that lake. And everybody, I think, who has any understanding of the enormous expense of major environmental projects knows that it has to be a shared project between the federal, state, and local government. That's the way it has always been. That's the way it really is going to have to be. And we're looking for widespread support, and we're optimistic that working with state government on this, we're going to get it through the legislature, and that next year we're going to see significant work beginning, so that within a few years, this problem, which has existed in this city forever, for decades, will once and for all be solved. And anything you wanted to add on that, George?
No.
Okay. So those are the three major areas in terms of infrastructural work that's going on. The streets and sidewalks, the solid waste problem with the landfill, and thirdly, our sewer system. And together, that's a lot of money. Those are big dollar items in which the people of the city are spending a substantial sum of money, but it has to be done. The city is not going to thrive. It is not going to be the great city that all of us want to be unless you deal with the infrastructure, and we are making real progress on that. Also, I hope that as the snow begins to fly, people are aware of the snow and ice removal plan published by the Public Works Department. I hope it went out with the Free Press, and it's a very good discussion of what the city is doing in terms of snow removal. And if people would like a copy of it, they could simply write to my office or to the Public Works Department, and we'll be happy to send it to you. But it's a pretty good detailed plan of how we intend to deal with snow removal. And in my view, and we had a couple of weeks ago, we had Brian Osborne, who's head of the street department, on this program. There's no question in my mind that as a result of the recent acquisition of new equipment, we have some of the best equipment available now to deal with snow removal from sidewalks and streets. That as a result of that effort, and as a result of a good plan and a motivated crew, we have guys who are really hardworking, good people, we're going to be on top of the snow situation this year. The one issue that has yet to be resolved, and it's a very, very difficult one, the Board of Aldermen discussed it last Monday night, is once again this problem of the parking ban and how it works. And I should remind people that as of December 1st, the parking ban goes into effect, which means that at midnight, right? At midnight, cars have got to be off the street. And as people will recall, several years ago we altered that plan because I and a number of members of the Board of Aldermen had concerns with why do cars have to get off the street at night if it is not going to snow. You're going to have nights, they're going to be 45, 50 degrees, the stars are going to be out, it's beautiful, and people are going to be forced to get their cars off the street. And several years ago, you'll recall, we did an experiment by which we only got cars off the street when we called a snow emergency. There were problems with that plan, essentially having to do that, especially in late winter, people were not getting their cars off the street. But we have not yet solved that problem. And we have gone back to the old plan now, which means that every night cars have got to be off the street so the plows can do their job. It is not the best situation, because it does mean that on occasion people are going to be having to get their cars off when the snow is not there. And we are looking for alternatives. It's not as easy as people might think, but that's the situation that we're in now. Anything you want to add on that, Joe?
Well, I think one thing for people in the downtown area, there are 300 spaces in the municipal garage that are available to people either at free or for $15 a month, depending on the time that they want to use them at night, and they would have to get them out in the morning, but it's a nice option for people in the downtown area
Right.
to take
And
advantage
if my
of.
recollection is correct, and we'll have more to say about this in the next few days, my recollection is correct, if people get their cars in there late and get them out early, actually it's free.
It is free.
Okay.
Right.
Now, the point there is we want to, everything being being equal, to make it as easy as possible for people to get their cars off the street. Because we know that for some people, this is a real problem, and so we're working on that one. While we're on the issue of public works, I think those people who follow local politics and city government will know that there has been a debate that has gone on actually in the city for a mere 17 years. Actually, Sam Levin, who's the alderman from Ward 4, was mentioning to me last month that he participated in this discussion something like 17 years ago. And some people say that city government doesn't move quickly. I don't know how they could say that. But and this issue has to deal with whether or not city government runs more efficiently and effectively if you have smaller separate departments, or whether or not you merge. And I think, as most people in Burlington know, in the last couple of years we have made a number of mergers. We have merged the traffic department and the street department and the wastewater department into one department, which is now the Public Works Department. And I think virtually all the members of the Board of Aldermen are in agreement that that has worked effectively and cost effectively and efficiently. The issue now is whether do we proceed with more merger or do we not. And I think actually on Monday night, which will be the day before this program is aired, the Board of Aldermen will be discussing the merger of the Parks Department into Public Works and the Water Department into Public Works. I support that merger. I think essentially, if you have merger, you will have the Public Works Department having the opportunity to better utilize its manpower and its woman power, its people power, in the sense that if you have a snowstorm, obviously you want your resources to go to getting snow off the street. If in the summertime you have thousands of people in our city parks, you're going to want to pay more attention to that. And if you can utilize your manpower to deal with the problems of the day, rather than having 5 different departments marching along, each in its own separate path, I think you'll get a more cost-effective operation. I think it will also be more cost-effective in the utilization not only of the people that we have, but of the equipment that we have. Sometimes I think we're overlapping. The street department will have equipment that in fact could be used by the water department. The water department will have equipment that could be used by the parks department. And if you have a merger, I think you can get better utilization out of those resources. One of the areas, though, that we want to maintain a separate identity is in the area of recreation. It is not our thought to merge recreational aspects of the Parks Department into the Public Works, because we think recreation really is a type of program which should involve parents and children, and elderly people. Those people who benefit from recreation are those people who should help us make the decisions. And I don't see the need to merge them into the Public Works Department. I think they should have their own identity, and that's the program that we've brought forth to the Board of Aldermen. Stay tuned for the meeting on Monday night to see what the board does on that. I should tell you that at this point, generally speaking, it's up in the air, and we'll see what will happen. There is an issue that I have been working on for a number of years, as well as the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, which will be coming up this session of the legislature, and I think getting a lot of discussion and a lot of play, and that deals with the concept of home rule. I think as many viewers know, I and many of us here in Burlington have been extremely unhappy in the last number of years with the fact that on numerous occasions, the people of the city of Burlington have voted for charter changes, a variety of charter changes that they felt was in the best interest of this city. In some cases, they voted for these charter changes overwhelmingly. Most of the charter changes had to deal with breaking our dependence upon the regressive and unfair property tax and developing methods of raising revenue which were fairer and more progressive. And we keep passing these things, and we go down to Montpelier, and under current law, the state legislature has to vote for our charter changes, whether or not they know anything about the particular needs of Burlington. And time after time, the Vermont state legislature has voted down changes that we have brought about to our own charter. Last year, for example, the people of Burlington voted for a real estate speculation tax as an effort to try to control real estate speculation and trying to keep rents affordable in the city. And the legislature said, no, you can't do it. We have voted in the past to have a rooms and meals tax so that those people who come into our city to utilize our facilities will be able to pay something for the maintenance of the services that they receive. Legislature said, no, you can't do that. You can't use rooms and meals money, for example, for education. And I could tick them off. There's just been a number of areas where we have voted good changes. We voted a number of years ago to do away with winter-summer rates for our electric department. Many of us in the city feel that winter-summer rates are not fair. Legislature said, no, even though you own your own electric department, you can't even do that. So what's been happening as a result of the way Burlington has been treated by the legislature, and also by a number of movements on the part of state government which have to do with the attempt to consolidate school districts with mandates that are passed by the legislature and imposed on communities, where the communities then have to pick up the financial burden of carrying out those mandates. And with a whole tendency, it seems, from state government which says, hey, we will tell you from Montpelier what you should be doing. And it really doesn't matter what you people back home feel. As a result of all of these movements, there has grown a strong feeling on the part of many city and town governments that enough is enough. And we want, here in Vermont, what exists in dozens and dozens of states throughout the country, and that is a degree of home rule. And what home rule means is that, and it varies from state to state, but essentially what it means is that everything being equal, the people of a community, the people of a city, the people of a town have a right to make decisions for their own community on local issues without interference from state government, if of course what they do is constitutional and not in violation of state law. George, you want to add anything?
No, I think when I was an alderman, I think I was campaigning for one of the more significant charter changes that got defeated, which was the add-on to the rooms and meals tax to fund education. And I found a lot of people very supportive of that, especially senior citizens who had living on fixed incomes and seeing their property taxes go up through reappraisal, really looking for an alternative, and it was very frustrating to have that one defeated.
Yeah, I'm not sure that everybody understands that in fact, in the state of Vermont, local government really doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of power. My view from the day that I was elected to today is that the property tax is an extremely regressive and stupid form of taxation for education and municipal services. There are a dozen ways that are fairer to raise money. And in Burlington, we have led the state in a wide variety of ways. We now have, for example, a classification system in place in Burlington, and we were the first community in the state to do this, and in fact, the only community. I guess Winooski followed us, but just our two communities, which now taxes commercial and industrial property at a higher rate than plain residential property, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because they're using their property to make money rather than simply as a place to live. We have a gross receipts tax now in Burlington on hotels and restaurants of 1%, which begins to bring in some revenue. And while we have a long, long way to go, in fact, an enormous struggle in front of us to deal with the whole issue of tax-exempt property, we have made a fraction of an inch gain in dealing with the University of Vermont. We now receive, as a result of discussions last year, some money from them for fire fees. But that whole issue of how you deal with tax-exempt institutions is also a very important issue for Burlington and for many communities around the state. So I think in terms of a concern that the Vermont League of Cities and Towns has, and many communities around the state, you're going to see a lot of action dealing with a constitutional change which would provide communities in the state of Vermont with home rule. And it's especially important because there is a myth which exists in Vermont that town meeting is important, or town meetings are significant, and we have a lot of local democracy, when really the truth of the matter is just the opposite. This state, almost more than any other state, has given very little autonomy for local government, and that's an issue where I will be speaking out on, as well as many other local officials. Another issue, as we head toward the legislative session, where I will be active, and it's an issue that affects, of course, Burlington, but it affects every community in the state of Vermont, is the issue of health care. We have put together, as I think many viewers know, a mayoral task force on health care. People have done an outstanding job. There have been 5 public meetings. And essentially the problem is that for many of our people, our senior citizens, working people, low-income people, the cost of health care is just going off the roof. And this is not just a Vermont problem, it's a national problem. The task force has visited Canada on 2 occasions. As you know, Canada has a national health program which varies province by province, but essentially provides universal free health care to all of its people. In fact, throughout the entire world, there are only two countries, the United States and South Africa, which lack that type of program, and this is an issue that we will be doing a whole lot of discussion about. And I know George has been doing a lot of work on that. George, anything you want to add on the healthcare issue?
Well, I think the task force is right now working on its final report, and we'll have a draft to circulate among the members and perhaps ready in early January for distribution to the legislature, which is going to be dealing with a lot of health issues this session, according to all sources. So that hopefully that'll help them in their deliberations.
Okay, just very briefly, we're running out of time. I want to touch on a couple of other issues that we are working on. We are working on the whole question of childcare. That is, again, an issue of national proportions, crisis situation nationally. I picked up in the paper just the other day, there was an article in the New York Times which suggested finally the federal government, I suppose, is beginning to talk about providing money for states and localities. We've got to do something about childcare. The cost of childcare is very, very high. The average working family cannot afford to spend, 1/3 of their income that they make per week providing childcare for their kids. So there's a lot of discussion going on. We have a task force on that. We will have some recommendations. My guess is in 2 weeks to a month. But I want to see Burlington take the lead on that statewide, as well as perhaps even nationally. It's a serious problem. We intend to deal with it effectively. We have established, as I think people know, a program to get us into a sister city relationship with a city in the Soviet Union. Just the other day, last week, I was at a lovely function at Burlington High School in which the kids who had come back from a trip to the Soviet Union, some kids who were doing some concerts there, had just returned. And as you recall, the spring it was, I believe, young people from Leningrad had come to Vermont. They had put on a beautiful concert at Memorial Auditorium. So we're going to pick up on the excellent work done by people in Project Harmony and see if we can develop an ongoing exchange program, and in whatever various types of approaches, make contact with the people in the Soviet Union. My own view is that at a time when this world is spending probably $1 trillion a year on weaponry and ways to kill people, having people get to know each other on a face-to-face basis, on a human level, will go an enormous distance to breaking down the barriers of mistrust and hatred. You don't have to like people, but you have to understand them and know them. And I think the more we do that, the better and safer this world is going to be. And we'll need as much citizen participation in that project as we possibly can have. 2 weeks ago, we had Martha Whitney on, who is head of who's working with us on the affirmative action program in the city, and we will have something on the Board of Aldermen dealing with affirmative action throughout the entire city for women workers within a couple of weeks, and you'll be hearing more about that one. The city continues to be active in its opposition to the Pyramid Mall, and that is going to be a very difficult, long, drawn-out fight. To me, it is of enormous environmental consequence to the state. If Pyramid Mall is built, what you're going to see is not just that Pyramid Mall, but in my view, malls like that all over the state of Vermont. And with that, I think you're going to see traffic problems in the rural areas, you're going to see air pollution, you're going to see water pollution, and you're going to see a real threat to the life of major cities and towns in the state of Vermont, all over the state. When we talk about maintaining the extraordinary environment and the beauty of the state of Vermont and the special quality of the state of Vermont, don't ignore urban life. And when we say, oh boy, it's the lake, it's the mountains, it's the hills, it's the farmland, it is all of that. But if the cities and towns go and the commercial activity in the cities and towns disappear, all of that's going to spread out into the suburbs, into the rural area, and we're not going to see a distinction in years to come from rural life to urban life. It's all going to be a blur, a sprawl. So I think that this issue of Pyramid Mall is it's a pivotal issue as to how the state of Vermont goes, and it's especially pivotal as we discuss the whole question of growth. And if we're concerned about responsible growth, I think we've got to do a lot of thinking before we support a Pyramid Mall. I think we're running out of time. I want to thank George Thabault and all of you for watching. We'll see you again next week.
Okay.
Oh,
hey, great.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Good, thanks, George. It was
Fast.
probably not what you're talking about, but it was, no, your presence was helpful.
Yeah, good.
I thought that didn't go too bad.
Nope.
float along.
lot of topics.
Yeah, I mean, that's good, and I think once in a while, it's just good to review, what we're doing. Okay,